The town of Great Barrington is hosting the W.E.B. DuBois Legacy Festival through March 1st, with different events scheduled. Recently, some residents in town have proposed renaming the Monument Valley Regional Middle School after him. However, not everyone is in favor of the proposal. I sat down with Gwendolyn VanSant, a supporter of the name change, and the CEO of Bridge, a nonprofit multicultural advocacy organization, to learn more.
So a group of our racial justice volunteers got together to get enough signatures to do basically an environmental scan for the 3 towns that feed Berkshire Hills Regional School District. So that's Great Barrington, Stockbridge, and West Stockbridge. Because if we can get enough people at annual meeting to say they're interested in naming the school after W.E.B. Du Bois, then we will put together a formal proposal for the school committee and present an idea of renaming the middle school. So that's sort of the steps. So first we're getting community interest, and then we'll go to the school committee with a full proposal.
So tell us a little bit about W.E.B. Du Bois.
W.E.B. Du Bois is a global icon for civil rights and social justice. He really was a man before his time. He was born in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, where I live, and he traveled the world, and he died in Ghana. But he fought for racial justice. He wrote. He was a scholar. He was a sociologist. He was a poet. He was just everything, really. And the world really celebrates Du Bois, but when you get into our hometown, we've been sort of slow in coming for some of his choices in his later life. But really what we're trying to do is restore his entire presence. And the town of Great Barrington and its leadership the last 2 years has really stepped forward to do that. He turned 150 last year, and they created a task force to celebrate his birthday, which is now actually a full official town committee for the town of Great Barrington called the DuBois Legacy Committee. And we're really heralding racial justice, education, civil rights, and economic justice.
So he also helped found the NAACP
Yes.
as well.
Yes. Du Bois is the founder of the NAACP. He was the first Harvard PhD graduate that was African American. The list really goes on.
What's the feedback you've been getting from people?
Everyone is really excited to learn about Du Bois. There's sort of a community, we're in a rural community in Western Mass, so there's memory of the conflicts around Du Bois and his communism. So what we've been really focused on is celebrating who he was and all of the lessons that he's left for us that are really relevant today. So there has been a lot of interest. We run a college course through the community college where anyone can access it last year and this year. So we're looking at his communism, his feminism, his environmentalism, his racial justice leadership. And so people are just interested and fascinated in how much he wrote. He was a prolific writer, and he really was an activist that every lesson that he wrote about, we still need to learn now, and people are really struck by that.
But you mentioned a little bit about his communism, and obviously, you know, those leanings make a lot of people uncomfortable. Yes. How do you balance that with all of the other works and writings that he's done, and make the case to people who might be on the fence, you know, about renaming a middle school, that you're trying to keep things, you know, not having any sort of political connotations, right? How do you make the case to people?
So this has been one of our hot buttons, and this was the conflict back in 2003 and in 1969 in Great Barrington. So we went in with our eyes open for the 150th. So what we did was we had classes about Du Bois's communism, and there's a really wonderful letter on our website, DuBois150th.com, where Du Bois writes his application to the American Communist Party, so it's the American Communist Party, and he was asking for really basic things. Reduce labor exploitation, free education for all, free health care for all. There were 10 points. They're all the things that we care about today. He really was saying...
Some people care about.
Some people
might say, whoa, you know, that really does sound, you know, a little bit
over the top. He was, his belief, which I think is hard for people to live into, and sort of the work that Bridge does in our training, is that capitalism didn't really leave an equitable future for all races. And so when the United States and its capitalism is the foundation, the United States has capitalism as its foundation, Du Bois really concluded near the end of his life, after 90 years of fighting for justice, that there was no positive end in sight, that we would self-destruct. So I think that was a challenge to people for when they believe in the American dream, to believe that capitalism really would always only be successful on the backs of certain people. So that's what Du Bois's communism was about. The actual following leaders, we talked earlier that he rejected the dictatorship and the violence of the leaders. He really was a pacifist as well. He believed in education, but he just understood that U.S. capitalism was not going to end poverty.
Right, and so that could be a hard sell, though, you know, for people. How do you make it not a political issue and more one about, historical significance if you're trying to bring in,
Yes.
3 different towns. Because, some people might be like, whoa, communism, like what, everything she just said, no way. But how do you bring it back to a more historical context?
I bring it back to Du Bois being a leader. I mean, when you pick up Darkwater, you pick up Souls of Black Folk, which is the most well-known, or Black Reconstruction, it's as if you're reading stuff that we need to read today. It's about racial justice and equity. So he's just a teacher for all times and all ages. So I think people are learning from him constantly. Our most recent class, we had Reverend Sloan Letman from the Second Congregational Church, and he talked about Du Bois actually challenging religion. So he used his writing to make us all think more and be more present in our lives. And I think that when people sit and understand that he was writing to help us all think and be critical in our existence in the world, people begin to relate to his work.
And in addition, I know that, even some of his writing back then, speaking of the communism, caused friction within the NAACP as well. So,
yes.
So he certainly made people think.
He challenged people.
He challenged people.
I think that people are used to having an either or. It was like Du Bois or, just always, there's always a duality of like, oh, Du Bois was good or bad, or he was this or that. But I think he was just trying to get us to think about the structures in place and how we could improve them all.
Right. So what's the next step for you?
The next step is having the signatures we have West Stockbridge and Stockbridge left. And then we will take it to the school committee, and then we will put the proposal together. We are actually celebrating his birthday on February 23rd. And again, we're celebrating his writing, his love for the Berkshires. He wrote even in 1969, he wrote a beautiful sort of introduction about the Berkshire landscape in Western Mass. So our work is always about holding him up in his fullness and in his ideals that most people do care about. Education, justice, and equity, and economic freedom. And those are the things that he really fought for. So we're just going to continue promoting Du Bois and welcoming him home is basically what we say, because when you travel the country or the world, Du Bois is a global icon. So we're just trying to welcome him back to Western Mass and the Berkshires.
And what do you think that Du Bois would think of the world today?
He'd be like, really? You guys are still at this? That's what I think. I think that he sort of was a sage, right? He gave us sort of a script of how things would be, and we're living that out right now in many ways. And so I think that he would be pushing us a little bit more to think about the next step.
Although when you think of like what communist countries and how they have progressed and not done as well as perhaps communists have thought they would.
Yeah.
So it's still, I think we'd be at that same point, right? We'd still
the
be at that.
friction would still be there if he was. But my guess is his writing would be different, because if you follow his writing, he has critiqued himself, right? And he's corrected himself throughout time. And I think he really would be talking about the systems in place that are not allowing us to be the country that we want ourselves to be. And I think how that presents itself now is what he would be writing about. We had a fascinating talk with Dr. Anthony Haynes. He's a University of Albany professor of law and computer science. So he said his talk was all about, if Du Bois were alive today, yes, he'd still be concerned about racial equity, but he'd be talking to us about bias in technology and computer systems and what does it look like now in 2019 versus what it looked like 100 years ago.